The Endgame Directive, a Frank Murray investigation. Season 3, Episode 6. New Delhi smells like 2,000 years of civilization stacked on top of each other and set on fire. That's not a complaint. Most of the world's great cities have their own version of this quality. The particular density of a place that has been continuously inhabited long enough to accumulate history the way old wood accumulates rings. Seoul has it. Tokyo has it in layers you don't notice until you stop moving. Manila, where we come from 6 days ago, has it in a completely different register. The specific way of a colonial city that never fully forgot what was done to it. New Delhi has all that, and then adds a particular aromatic combination of marigold garlands, diesel exhaust, street food, and the ancient dust of the Gangetic Plain. It hits you the moment you walk out of Indira Gandhi International Airport and into the November heat, which is not actually hot by local standards, apparently, just hot by the standards of two people who'd spent the previous week in a city on the South China Sea, and before that the better part of 3 weeks chasing the end of a criminal empire across half of Asia. 62 degrees, Sarah said, reading her phone as we waited for the car the embassy had arranged. They call this their cool season. I've worked cases in December in Chicago. I said, this is fine. The smog advisory is moderate to severe, she said. Also fine, I said. She gave me the look that meant she was choosing not to argue with something she considered self-evidently incorrect, which was a look I'd earned on multiple continents over the past 6 weeks and had learned to wear without comment. The car arrived. I thought about what we'd learned in Manila, about the Endgame Directive, about what Pemberton had apparently decided to do if he ever concluded that the net was closing faster than he could move. Before I go any further, if you like these stories as much as I like telling them, please hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment below. YouTube needs to know you're out there. It really does help me out. And now, back to the part where someone's trying to kill us. Let me back up. Manila had given us Eduardo Villanueva and Constance, and 11 people recovered from a logistics warehouse in Tagwig that Pemberton's network had converted, very quietly, very expensively, into a satellite intake facility for Project Chrysalis. Not a full research site. An intake and transit facility, a place where subjects were assessed, prepared, and then moved to wherever the active research was happening. The active research, according to the documentation, NBI Special Agent Isabel Reyes had spent 48 hours extracting from those servers, was happening in 2 places. One was a facility in Hong Kong, which was still active as of the last update timestamp in the files, and which Frank and Sarah Murray had flagged for Torres and for the Hong Kong authorities through channels that Torres had spent 3 days quietly building before we'd even landed in Manila. The other was here, New Delhi, a pharmaceutical research institute in South Delhi that, according to the Manila server data, had been operating as a Chrysalis site for 14 months. 14 months. While we'd been in Los Angeles and Seoul and Tokyo and Singapore and Bangkok and Manila, there had been people in New Delhi enrolled in a program they didn't understand in a research institute that had been quietly acquired by a holding company that traced back to Pemberton's architecture in a city that had no idea what was operating inside it. This was the nature of what Pemberton had built. Not a conspiracy with a center, a network with nodes, each one independent enough to survive if another went dark, each one connected in ways that only became visible when you had enough of the documentation, and enough of the people who kept their own records, and enough investigators who refused to stop pulling threads. We'd been pulling threads for 6 months. We were still finding what was attached to them. The Endgame Directive had come out of the Manila files too, not a document, a phrase, recurring in internal communications over the past 8 weeks, since Pemberton's arrest in Seoul and the subsequent unraveling of the Tokyo and Singapore operations, a phrase that appeared in messages between operational leads at different facilities, in language that was careful enough to be deniable but pointed enough that Isabel Reyes had flagged it immediately and called Torres directly rather than going through normal channels. Endgame Directive meant no recoverable evidence. It meant that if the network determined that a facility was about to be compromised, that facility was to be shut down in a specific way. Subjects relocated and here the language got very careful, very indirect, very deliberately ambiguous about what exactly happened to people who couldn't be relocated cleanly. Documentation destroyed. Equipment removed or rendered unusable. Personnel dispersed, with financial incentives large enough to make disappearing seem like the sensible option. It meant that Pemberton, sitting in whatever Korean holding arrangement his lawyers had managed to negotiate while 3 countries' extradition proceedings ground forward, had apparently decided that if he was going down, as much of the evidence as possible was going down with him, and the New Delhi facility had received an Endgame Directive communication 4 days ago. We had, by Miles's estimate, somewhere between 48 hours and none at all before whatever was in that building was gone. The person Torres had connected us with in New Delhi was not, technically, law enforcement. Her name was Priya Anand. She was 38 years old, a former senior investigator with the Central Bureau of Investigation who had left the CBI 3 years ago to run a private forensic consulting firm that contracted primarily with financial regulators, international NGOs, and on a handful of occasions that she described as operationally interesting. Foreign intelligence and law enforcement services operating in India with Indian government awareness. She was waiting for us at the hotel in Connaught Place, sitting in the lobby with the particular posture of someone who had developed a professional ability to look entirely at ease in any environment while registering everything about it simultaneously. Late 30s, dark hair pulled back precisely, a salwar kameez in deep blue that managed to be both completely appropriate for the weather and somehow suggest a person who made deliberate choices. She stood when she saw us with the efficiency of someone who had identified us before we identified her. "Murray," she said. "Not a question." "That's me," I said. "This is my wife and partner, Sarah." "Murray," she said to Sarah, with the same flat assessment and the ghost of something that might have been approval. Then, to both of us, "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Sarah asked. 2 more people who had explained to me that they had a very short timeline and needed my help and would not be fully transparent about why they specifically needed a private consultant rather than going directly through official Indian law enforcement channels. She paused. "That is presumably still the case, but I expected it to feel more like being managed." "We can manage you if you prefer," Sarah said, "but it would be less efficient." Priya Anand smiled. It was brief and precise, like everything else about her. "Efficiency is something I value," she said. "Sit down. Tell me what is actually happening." We sat down. We told her. It took an hour. She asked better questions than almost anyone I briefed in 6 months. Not questions that signaled skepticism or questions designed to demonstrate her own knowledge of adjacent topics, but questions that identified the specific gaps in what we knew and then probed them methodically. How was the New Delhi facility connected to the Manila transit operation? What was the nature of the ownership chain, and how many steps did it take to reach Pemberton's network? How current was the Endgame Directive communication, and what exactly had it instructed? When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Outside the hotel windows, Connaught Place hummed with a particular rhythm, the circular colonial arcade that New Delhi had kept and adapted and made entirely its own, a ring of white columns and small shops and auto rickshaws, and the kind of urban density that makes Los Angeles feel like a small town. "The Bhattacharya Institute," she said. "I know it. Not well, but I know it." "You've looked at it?" I said. "Not specifically. But when I was with the CBI, I had occasion to look at several pharmaceutical research institutions that had undergone significant ownership restructuring in the past 3 years. The Bhattacharya was on a list of institutions that showed unusual financial activity around the time of a restructuring. It was low priority. The irregularities weren't significant enough to justify a full investigation alongside everything else we were working. She paused. In retrospect, I understand now what I was looking at. "Do you have contact there?" Sarah asked. "Inside the institute?" "I have a contact who may have a contact," Priya said, "which is frequently how these things work." She picked up her phone. "The more immediate question is the Endgame Directive. If they received instructions to destroy evidence and relocate subjects, we need to know the current status of that process. Are they in preparation, or are they actively executing?" "Miles is monitoring the facility's communications infrastructure," I said. "As of 4 hours ago, normal operational pattern. No unusual movement." "For hours is a long time," Priya said. "Yes," I agreed. "It is." She called her contact. She spoke in Hindi, rapid and specific, and I caught maybe one word in 10, which was one word more than Sarah caught. Sarah's Korean was fluent, and her Mandarin was competent, and her Spanish was excellent. But Hindi was a gap she'd acknowledged on a flight from Manila with the practical equanimity of someone who had learned that every case eventually puts you somewhere your existing skills don't fully cover. The call lasted 4 minutes. Priya hung up. "My contact has a nephew," she said, "who works in the administrative office of the Bhattacharya Institute, who called his uncle yesterday evening to say that something unusual had happened at work. Several staff members have been told their contracts were ending at the end of the week with full severance. A facility director who had been in the building every day for 14 months was not in the building today." She paused. "They are beginning execution. Miles called while we were in the car to South Delhi. Activity at the Bhattacharya," he said. "I've been watching the cellular traffic pattern around the facility. I can't get into their internal systems from here, but cell traffic gives you a footprint. There's been an increase in outbound encrypted messaging in the past 6 hours. The pattern matches what I saw at the Tanaka facility in Fujisawa in the 12 hours before Nakamura moved." "How long?" I said. "Difficult to say. If they're following the Endgame protocol as designed, they'd want to clear subjects first before destroying documentation. That's the slower part. If there are active research participants in the facility." "How many?" I said. "Estimate. Based on the Manila intake records and the timeline, 14 months of operation at a facility this size, with the subject attrition pattern we've seen elsewhere, somewhere between 20 and 40 people." A pause. "Frank, if the Endgame protocol includes what the Manila communications suggested it might, about subjects who can't be relocated cleanly—" "I know," I said. Priya was in the front seat. She had heard enough to understand the shape of the conversation. "We need official involvement," she said. "Not tomorrow. Tonight." "Your CBI contacts," Sarah said. "Half my CBI contacts consider me a traitor for leaving," Priya said, without particular bitterness. "The other half still call me when they have problems they can't solve through normal channels. What I need is someone on the right side of both those categories." She was already dialing. "Drive. I will tell you when we need to stop." We drove. New Delhi at 7 in the evening is a city in transition. The government quarters shutting down, the market areas and restaurants coming alive, the roads carrying that particular rush hour density that takes a certain kind of equanimity to navigate if you're not from there. Our driver had it. He wove through the traffic of Lutyens' Delhi, the planned colonial grid giving way to the older, denser streets of South Delhi, with the calm of someone who has stopped experiencing traffic as an obstacle and started experiencing it as a medium to move through. I watched the city. Bougainvillea over a garden wall, a roadside shrine with fresh marigolds, an auto rickshaw driver negotiating a fare with elaborate hand gestures, a man on a bicycle carrying approximately 14 feet of plastic pipe across his handlebars, the ordinary texture of a place that was, in some building in South Delhi, hosting something that had nothing to do with ordinary. Priya finished her second call. "Dep, Commissioner Ahuja," she said. "Special Crimes, Delhi Police. We were colleagues, more than colleagues for a period. He has the authority to authorize an emergency response team and the judgment to use it when I tell him it's necessary." She paused. "He would like documentation." "Miles," I said into the phone, which I kept on. "Did you get that?" "Already compiling." Miles said, "I'll have a package for Dep, Commissioner Ahuja in 40 minutes. Manila server data, Tokyo precedent documentation, Singapore Maritime Authority records, the chain of corporate ownership to Pemberton, the whole architecture." A pause. 40 minutes, Frank. Don't go in without it. "We're going to do some reconnaissance first," Sarah said, looking at the map on her phone. "We're 4 minutes from the Bhattacharya. We'll establish the perimeter, confirm activity, and wait for Miles's documentation before Priya sends it to Ahuja." "Reconnaissance," Priya said. "This means you will park across the street and look at the building." "Mostly," Sarah said. Priya absorbed this with the expression of someone who had made peace with the partial nature of the information she was going to receive. Definition of mostly? "We won't go in," I said. "We'll observe." If we see evidence that the Endgame protocol is in active execution, if people are being moved, if there are vehicles being loaded, we call Ahuja directly and you get us inside the timeline. And if you see something more urgent than vehicles being loaded, Priya said, then we make different decisions. I said, she looked at me, then at Sarah. Then she nodded, which was a pragmatic acknowledgement of a person who understood that some situations required flexibility, even when flexibility was not the approach she would have chosen. The Bhattacharya Institute for Neurological Research occupied a 4-story building set back from a leafy street in the residential commercial patchwork of South Delhi's Hauz Khas neighborhood. It looked exactly like what it was supposed to look like, a modest, respectable private research facility, the kind of building that appears in neighborhoods like this one across academic and research cities everywhere. Clean lines, a small garden, a reception area visible through glass doors, a security desk with a single guard. The garden had marigolds. Someone had planted them recently. The colors were very bright. We parked 50 meters down the street, engine off, in the shadow of a large neem tree that provided cover without blocking the sight line. Sarah had a small pair of binoculars. I had my phone with a telephoto lens attachment that Miles had sourced at the beginning of Season 3 and that had earned its cost approximately 12 times since. For the first 20 minutes, nothing happened that was inconsistent with a research facility winding down an ordinary working day. Then a van arrived, not remarkable in itself. Vans deliver things to buildings. But this van had no markings, which was notable, and it parked at the side entrance rather than the front, which was more notable, and 3 men got out and went inside to the side door, which was admitted with what looked like a key code rather than by the reception staff, which was the most notable thing of all. Freight in trance, Sarah said quietly. Loading out, I said. They're early. My phone buzzed. Miles. Cellular traffic just spiked, he said without preamble. Multiple encrypted outbounds from inside the building. This is a pattern I saw at the Manila facility in the 40 minutes before they started moving subjects out. Frank, the documentation is ready. I'm sending it to Priya's contact information now. Send it, I said. Priya, call Ahuja. Now. Priya was already dialing. For the next 11 minutes, the 3 of us sat in the car and watched the Bhattacharya Institute, while Priya talked to Deputy Commissioner Ahuja in rapid, precise Hindi, and Sarah monitored the side entrance with the binoculars, and I watched the front entrance and the street and the unmarked van, and Miles stayed on the line, providing real-time cellular pattern updates. At the 7-minute mark, a second van arrived, this one parked at the front. That's not freight, Sarah said. It wasn't. 2 men got out of the front van. They stood at the entrance in a way that was not the posture of people making a delivery. It was the posture of people establishing a position. Security, I said, they're covering both exits. Covering them from what? Sarah said, from us. I said, from anyone. They've been told there's a threat of intervention, and they're preparing for it. Priya ended her call. Ahuja is moving. 25 minutes to assemble a response team and get here. He has the documentation. He says it is... She paused, as if translating an expression precisely. Substantially concerning, which in his vocabulary means he is already angry and moving fast. 25 minutes, Sarah said. We looked at the 2 men standing in front of the Bhattacharya Institute. The second van's side door opened, and a 3rd man got out and walked to the side entrance. 3 on security. At least 3 loading freight at the side entrance. Inside, an unknown number of staff and an unknown number of research subjects who had no idea what was happening to them. We should be closer, Sarah said. We said we wouldn't go in. I said we should be closer, she said. That's not the same thing. She was right, and I knew from 16 years of working with her that closer meant position to act, not position to observe, and that the distinction was one she made precisely and not casually. Sarah didn't move toward danger without a reason. She moved toward it when the reasons for staying back had been outweighed. Priya, I said, stay with the car. If anything changes before Ahuja arrives, call him and keep calling him. I am coming with you, Priya said. You're not armed, I said. Neither are you, she said. This was true. India's firearms laws were specific, and our arrangements for this visit had not included weapons. We were two American private investigators and a private consultant in a city where none of U.S. had arrest authority, and none of us were carrying anything more useful in a confrontation than Sarah's professional competence and my long experience of being in situations like this one. We're not looking for a confrontation, I said. We're looking for a position that gives Ahuja better options when he arrives. That's all. That's still all, Priya said, with the precise intonation of a person who had heard this qualified before and knew how it ended. For as long as we can make it be, Sarah said. We got out of the car. The street behind the Bhattacharya Institute connected to an alley that ran behind several buildings in the block. The standard service access that most older South Delhi buildings shared, wide enough for a vehicle but not designed for heavy traffic. We came around the back of the building on foot, moving at the pace of two people with a purpose that wasn't urgent enough to attract attention. Priya, who had come anyway, moved with the particular economy of a former CBI investigator who had spent years doing exactly this kind of thing officially and had not lost the habits. The back of the Bhattacharya had a service entrance, currently closed, and two ground-floor windows with frosted glass that suggested internal rooms with no natural light. Storage, utility, possibly the lower-level research suites we'd seen in every other Chrysalis facility. There was a loading dock, empty. There was a camera above the service entrance, currently active. They can see us, Sarah said quietly. Maybe, I said. Depends on who's watching the monitor. If they're busy loading, the security feed may not have full attention. We shouldn't assume that, Priya said. No, I agreed. From my phone, Miles. Cellular activity inside just went quiet, he said. Not tapering. Sudden stop. That's not normal shutdown. That's someone cutting internal comms deliberately. Frank, I think they know someone's outside. And then the service entrance opened. Two men came out, not carrying anything, moving with purpose. I moved left. Sarah moved right. Priya, reading the situation in real time with the speed of someone whose instincts were well calibrated, stepped back into the shadow of the alley wall. The two men scanned the alley, saw me. There was a moment, one of those compressed seconds that happen in moments of professional confrontation, where everyone assesses everyone else and all the calculations happen simultaneously. They were larger than me. They had the particular quality of men who had done physical work of the kind that involved other people's physical resistance. I was a private investigator who had been shot at 14 times and was still standing, which said something about my experience and nothing useful about my prospects in an unarmed confrontation with two men this size. The first man said something in Hindi that I didn't need to understand. I'm sorry, I said, in the tone of a tourist who has wandered somewhere he shouldn't. I think I took the wrong turn. They didn't buy it. The first man moved toward me. I stepped back into the side in a way that 16 years of occasionally physical investigations had taught me was useful, not retreating exactly, redirecting, creating a kind of geometry that turned a straight-line approach into something less effective and ran into the very solid reality of the alley wall being closer than I'd estimated. The second man was circling left, and then Sarah was there. 20 years in LAPD, the last 8 as a detective, produces a specific set of practical skills in the application of force in confined spaces that I had witnessed many times and never stopped being grateful for. The second man discovered 3 of them in rapid succession. He was on the ground in approximately 4 seconds. The first man had turned to look. I used the moment. It was not elegant, and it was not brief, but it ended with the first man also on the ground, and Sarah standing between them with the focused calm of someone who had done what needed doing, and was now reassessing the situation for what came next. Closer, she said. You were right, I said. My ribs were going to have opinions about this tomorrow. We should call Ahuja. I'm calling, Priya said. She was already on the phone. This is going to accelerate his timeline. From inside the building, through the still-open service entrance, I heard something. Not a voice. A sound that it took me a moment to identify. And then when I identified it, I moved. It was a sound of file drawers being opened, hard drives being removed, the specific percussion of evidence being destroyed on a schedule. What I should have done was wait for Ahuja. What I did was go through the service entrance. Sarah was 4 steps behind me, which meant she'd made the same calculation in approximately the same time. Priya was on the phone with Ahuja and had moved to the corner of the building where she could watch both the alley and the street. The two men outside were not going anywhere. The service corridor was institutional. Concrete walls, fluorescent lighting, the smell of cleaning fluid, and something underneath it that I'd smelled in every Chrysalis facility I'd entered, a specific clinical undertone that I'd come to associate with bad decisions made in the name of research. The corridor ran past storage and utility rooms to a stairwell, and from below us came the sound of activity, the basement level, where the research suites always were. We went down. The basement corridor of the Bhattacharya Institute was identical in architecture and in violation to every other sublevel I'd seen in 6 months. The frosted glass observation panels, the reinforced doors on access-coded locks, the lighting that was too bright and too blue, and had nothing to do with any environment a person would voluntarily spend time in. 3 rooms. 2 were open. 1 was closed. In the first open room, a man in a white coat was feeding documents into a shredder with the focused urgency of someone on a deadline. He looked up when we came in. He was young, 25 maybe, the kind of young that looked even younger under stress, and his expression went through 5 distinct phases in about 2 seconds, ending somewhere between terror and relief. "Stop," I said. He stopped. "Step away from the shredder." He stepped away. "Are you a researcher here?" I asked. He nodded. His hands were shaking. "Did you know what this program actually was?" A different kind of shake. "I suspected," he said, in accented English that was precise and educated and miserable. 2 months ago I suspected. I did not know what to do with what I suspected. "You can help us," Sarah said from the doorway. "Right now, we're the subjects, the research participants." "Third floor," he said. "They have not been told anything. Dr. Mehta said it was a schedule change. But I think the men who came tonight, I think they're going to move them." "How many?" I said. 26, he said, currently enrolled. 26. "What's your name?" I said. "Arjun," he said. "Arjun Bose. I am a research associate. I did not want this. I did not understand when I was hired what—" "Arjun," I said, "the Delhi police are on their way. When they arrive, you're going to tell them everything. Every protocol document, every communication, every name you heard, whatever is still in this building. You're going to help them find it. Do you understand?" He understood. The trembling quality of his relief made that clear. The second open room contained a server rack and 2 men in the process of removing drives with the systematic efficiency of people following a protocol they'd been given in advance. They were not the kind of men who stopped when someone told them to stop. They were the kind of men who assessed the threat level of the person doing the telling. Sarah and I were unarmed, and one of my ribs was strongly suggesting it had been damaged in the alley. The 2 men had finished their assessment. The first one moved. And then from above us came the sound of multiple vehicles arriving simultaneously and the particular quality of organized police entry. Not subtle, not uncertain. The specific sound of a deputy commissioner with a team and a mandate, and both men in the server room recalculated. They recalculated correctly. They stopped. "Floor," Sarah said, in the tone she used when the statement was not a request. They went to the floor. From above us, the sound of Deputy Commissioner Ahuja's response team spreading through the Bhattacharya Institute was the most satisfying thing I'd heard since Nakamura's team had cleared the Fujisawa campus 4 months ago. I leaned against the doorframe and let my ribs have their opinions and listened to it. The third door opened from the inside. The woman who stepped out was in her mid-50s, dressed in professional clothes of someone who had been at work since early morning and had not expected her day to end like this. She was compact and precise, with the bearing of a person who had spent decades in institutional settings and had learned to project authority as a default. She looked at Sarah. She looked at me. She looked at the 2 men on the floor. She took in the sound of police activity above us. "Dr. Nandita Mehta," she said, with the flat precision of someone introducing themselves because the situation seemed to require it. "Director of the Bhattacharya Institute. I am going to assume you are the people I was told would be coming." "Who told you we'd be coming?" I said. "Mr. Pemberton's operational network," she said. who told me that if American investigators appeared at or near this facility, I was to execute the Endgame protocol immediately. She paused. I was in the process of deciding whether to do that. And Sarah said, Dr. Mehta looked at the sound coming from above, and I have decided not to. A pause that had something complicated in it. Not relief exactly, not guilt exactly, but the specific quality of a decision long in the making finally being made. I have been the director of this institute for 11 years. The Bhattacharya was my father-in-law's institution. I watched it become something I did not choose for it to become. Over a period of 2 years, through a process of financial pressure and structural acquisition that I was not equipped to resist and did not fully understand until it was too late to resist cleanly. She stopped. I have been in that room for the past 40 minutes trying to decide what the rest of my life should look like. The 26 subjects on the 3rd floor, I said. They're safe? They are safe, she said. I did not. I will not say I protected them. I participated in a system that put them in that building under false pretenses. But I also refused twice when the operational network asked me to accelerate the research protocols in ways I believed would cause serious harm. I refused, and I documented those refusals, and I have kept those documents in a place that is not this building. She looked at me. I am going to give them to you. 16 months ago, in a building in Los Angeles, a scientist named Dr. Foster had made a different choice than the one Dr. Nandita Mehta was making now. The difference mattered. The context mattered. The fact that the choice had been made late and under circumstances that were partly her own responsibility. That mattered too. None of it erased the other. But 26 people were on the 3rd floor and safe, and that was a number that was going to stay with me. Come upstairs, I said. Deputy Commissioner Ahuja is going to want to talk to you. Ahuja was everything Priya had suggested he would be. A compact, deliberate man in his early 50s with the contained energy of someone who had spent a career managing situations that could not be managed with anything less than full attention. He moved through the Bhattacharya Institute with the assurance of someone who had done this in 100 different buildings and always found the same things inside them. He found them here. The 3rd floor held 26 people ranging from their mid-20s to their early 60s, all enrolled in what they had been told was a neurological wellness optimization study with significant financial compensation. The same language, the same promise, the same manufacturer consent that Project Chrysalis had used in Los Angeles and Seoul and Tokyo and Bangkok and Manila. All Indian nationals. All people who had responded to recruitment outreach that had, by the documentation recovered from the partially shredded files, been specifically targeted at individuals experiencing financial stress. All safe, all frightened, all in need of medical evaluation that Ahuja had already requested before he'd finished walking through the building. I sat with 2 of them while they waited for the medical team. A young man named Ravi who worked in software and had enrolled 6 weeks ago because the compensation would have covered his mother's surgery. A woman in her 40s named Sunita who had been told the study was about cognitive enhancement and had been told this in ways that made it sound appealing and legitimate and had no reason to disbelieve it. Neither of them understood fully what had been happening to them. I didn't explain it in detail. That was for physicians and counselors in time, not for a private investigator from Los Angeles sitting in a repurposed research corridor in New Delhi at 9:30 in the evening. What I told them was that they were safe, that the people responsible for what had happened here were going to face legal consequences, that they were the most important people in this building tonight, and that everyone who had just arrived was here for them. Ravi nodded slowly. The man behind this, he said, is he in India? No, I said. He's in custody. In Korea, currently, pending extradition proceedings that involve 3 other countries. Will he be punished? 16 years in this business. 23 victims in Los Angeles. 4 in Seoul. 17 in Tokyo. 11 in Manila. 26 here. He will, I said. I believe that. Ravi nodded again. He didn't say anything else. He sat with a particular exhausted stillness of someone who had just been told something they needed to be true and were choosing, for tonight at least, to let be true. I sat with him until the medical team arrived. Torres called at 11 p.m. New Delhi, he said. 26. I said, all safe. Dr. Mehta is cooperating. She has documentation that goes back 14 months, her personal records, including 2 refusals that she documented. It's not Tanaka-level comprehensive, but it's significant. Does it include Pemberton by name? Torres asked. Not directly in the documents she kept, but the operational communications recovered from the servers that the response team secured before they could be fully wiped. Miles is working on the partial recovery now. He thinks he can get 60 to 70% of what was there. 60 to 70% of a 14-month communication record, Torres said. Yes, I said. The particular quality of Torres absorbing information and running it against everything else he was holding. Hong Kong, he said. The facility from the Manila records. My counterpart in the Hong Kong police force received Miles's documentation package this morning. They are moving tomorrow. We don't need to be there, I said. They have everything they need for what Miles sent. Torres said, and the Hong Kong authorities, Frank, do not require the involvement of American private investigators to execute a search warrant. They are very good at this. That's the first time I've heard you're not needed as good news in 6 months, I said. It is good news, Torres said. It means the network we've built across 6 jurisdictions is working without you having to be in every room. Frank, the extradition proceedings. The Korean prosecutors released a statement today. Combined with everything from Tokyo, Singapore, Manila, and now New Delhi, the evidentiary basis of the consolidated U.S. case is being described by the U.S. Attorney's Office as the most comprehensive documentation of ongoing criminal conspiracy they have received from international sources in the past decade. That's a lot of adjectives for Torres, I said. I am quoting the U.S. Attorney, he said. I do not use that many adjectives. A pause. I am more than cautiously optimistic, Frank. I want to be careful about that. His lawyers are still very good, and the proceedings are long and many things can happen. But the picture is different from anything we've had before. Zurich, I said, there's a financial architecture in Switzerland that we haven't fully mapped. The accounts that have been funding all of this across 6 countries, the beneficial ownership chains, the holding companies, they run through Zurich. I know, Torres said, and that is the next conversation, but not tonight. Take care of yourself, both of you. We will, I said, and Frank, good work. Thank you, Torres, I said. I hung up. Sarah was across the room, talking quietly with Priya, the 2 of them standing near a window that looked out over the lit streets of Hawes Cause, the city continuing its indifferent, magnificent life around the perimeter of what had just happened inside this building. I watched them for a moment. Sarah and a woman she'd met 9 hours ago, talking with the ease of people who had been through something together and were processing it, the specific warmth of an alliance formed under pressure. I thought about the next stop, Zurich, the financial infrastructure that had funded all of this, the shell companies and the holding structures and the beneficial ownership chains that ran through Swiss banking architecture with the efficiency of water finding the lowest path. We needed to map it. We needed to freeze it. We needed, honestly, a different kind of help than we'd needed in Seoul or Tokyo or Singapore or Manila or New Delhi. A financial investigator. Someone who understood how money moved through Zurich the way Nakamura understood how organized crime moved through Japanese pharmaceutical companies, the way Isabel Reyes understood Manila, the way Ahuja understood Delhi. The network of people doing this work with us had grown in 6 months from the original group, Torres and Miles and Sarah and me, into something much larger and much harder to dismantle than we would have been on our own. That was the thing about Pemberton's operation that he hadn't counted on. He'd built for scale. He'd built his operation to be bigger than any one person or jurisdiction could stop. He'd built nodes and redundancies and contingencies. He'd apparently not accounted for the possibility that the people trying to stop him would do the same thing. Sarah caught my eye across the room. She read my expression with 16 years of practice. Zurich, she said. Zurich, I said, but not tonight. She almost smiled. Portugal, she said. After Zurich. You said that after Manila. I mean it more now, I said. Priya, who had caught the exchange, looked between us with the expression of someone filing information for future reference. Lisbon, she said. It's very good in the spring. The pasties and nata at the Andaga Confiterium are worth the flight alone. See, I said to Sarah, an independent recommendation. I will believe it when I am eating one, Sarah said. Deputy Commissioner Ahuja appeared in the doorway. Mr. Murray, he said, the medical team has completed initial evaluation. 26 individuals, all stable. Dr. Mehta is currently providing a full statement. He paused. Torresib speaks well of you. He's generous. I said, he is precise. Ahuja said, which is not the same thing. He looked at Priya with the specific expression of a man who had a complicated history with someone and had set it aside for the duration of a professional situation. Anand, good work. Ahuja, she said, brief but not unfriendly. The Bhattacharya Institute will be fully secure by morning, Ahuja continued. Miles Danforth has been in contact with my technical team regarding the server recovery. The partial data he is reconstructing is being routed through proper channels to the U.S. Attorney's office simultaneously. He looked at me. You have built something here, Mr. Murray, across several countries. It is not what I would call elegant. It is improvised and distributed, and it does not follow any standard procedure I am aware of. A pause. But it appears to be working. Most things at work are improvised, I said. In my experience, yes, he agreed. He nodded once. Good night. He went back to work. Outside, New Delhi continued. The traffic, the lights, the 2,000 years of civilization doing its particular night shift thing. Somewhere in a Korean holding facility, Richard Pemberton was in a room with his lawyers, and the knowledge that 6 more countries' worth of documentation had just been added to the pile. I thought about Ravi and his mother's surgery, about Sunita, sitting in a corridor on the 3rd floor, holding a paper cup of water with both hands. 26 more people who were going to spend a long time processing what had happened to them, and what it meant, and what they were owed. They were owed the truth first, then accountability. Then whatever came after accountability. The slower, harder work of understanding the full scope of what Chrysalis had done to them, and whether any of it could be undone, and what their lives looked like on the other side. We were still working on getting them the first part. We would go to Zurich to keep working on the second, the third, the part after accountability. That was going to take longer than any case I'd ever closed. But you don't stop because the whole thing is too large. You do what's in front of you. You do the next thing. You go to Zurich. We left New Delhi the following morning on a flight that connected through Dubai. At the airport, Priya walked us to security. She and Sarah had exchanged numbers. The specific exchange of 2 professionals who had worked together once, and both understood they might need to work together again. Zurich, Priya said, if you need an Indian connection to Swiss financial records, I have someone. Former SEBI investigator who moved to Geneva 5 years ago. He knows how South Asian money moves through Swiss structures. We may call, I said. Please do, she said. This was interesting work. The pause before interesting was a pause of someone choosing the most accurate word rather than the most comfortable one. For us too, Sarah said. Priya nodded. She shook Sarah's hand and then mine. Firm, brief, the handshake of a professional who did not extend warmth casually, but had extended it here and meant it. She walked back through the terminal. Sarah watched her go. She's good, she said. Very, I said. If Pemberton had anything in India before we got here, something we don't know about, she'll find it, I said. Sarah nodded. We went through security. I called Miles from the gate. Server recovery is at 68%, he said. Some of what they wiped was deep enough that it's gone. But what we have is substantial. 8 months of operational communications. 3 direct communications from Pemberton to the facility director regarding research protocol authorization. His digital signature, Frank, same format as what Singapore found. He authorized the New Delhi program personally and signed off on the protocol expansion in month 7. That's 6 jurisdictions with his signature on criminal directives. I said. 6, Miles confirmed, plus the Hong Kong operation, which the HKPF is moving on as we speak. I'll have preliminary Hong Kong server data within 12 hours of their entry. A pause with the quality of Miles Danforth, having done something that satisfied him deeply. Also, Frank, I've been working on the Zurich piece, the financial architecture. I've been working on it for 3 weeks because I knew it was coming, and I figured I'd have a head start ready. 3 weeks, I said. 7 beneficial ownership chains from major Swiss banking entities, and what I am relatively confident is the primary account structure through which all operational funding has been routed for the past 4 years. Another pause. I have a very solid picture of where the money lives. I do not yet have the legal basis to touch it. That's going to require Swiss cooperation, and Swiss cooperation requires somebody in Switzerland who wants to help. I said, yes. Miles said, we're working on it. I said, I know, he said. Be careful in Zurich. The people who protect money in Switzerland are not people who are going to be happy about what we're doing. Nobody's been happy about what we're doing since Seoul. I said, touché, Miles said. Detective sends his regards. By the way, he knocked over Mrs. Chen's egg roll delivery this morning, and she's not speaking to either of them. I thought about the office above Golden Dragon. The particular smell of 5-spice and sesame oil. A gray cat with both eyes regarding his domain with the serene indifference of an entity that had no interest in international criminal proceedings, but a very keen interest in the structural integrity of his sleeping arrangements. Give him my best, I said, and tell Mrs. Chen I'll bring her something from Switzerland. She wants to watch. Miles said, she's joking. I said, is she? Miles said, our gate was boarding. I picked up my bag. Sarah was already at the jetway, looking back at me with the particular expression of a person who had done this long enough to find patience when the situation required patience, but would very much like to be on the plane now. Zurich, I said into the phone. Be safe, Miles said. I hung up. I picked up my carry-on. My ribs contributed their opinions at volume. I went to the gate. We flew. 16 years in this business, and the one thing I've learned is that the truth doesn't find people. People find the truth, but only if someone keeps looking. If these cases matter to you the way they matter to me, hit that like button, subscribe, ring the bell, because the next case is already out there, waiting to be solved. Zurich is coming. The Endgame Directive is real, and we are not stopping. I'm Frank Murray. I don't quit. Neither should you.